Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the podcast.
398.
We are cusping on a threshold here. I didn't think we'd ever make it to it, but wow, we've made it up to almost 400 episodes. This is going to be exciting. I don't know what we're going to do in the 400th episode, but I have to figure something fun out there.
Is this the equivalent? I know Saturday Night Live this week is doing their SNL 50. They're doing this
50?
Yeah.
That's so lame.
It's 50,
400. 50 is so 390
years
episodes ago.
50 years of Saturday Night Live. Is this as significant and culturally impactful as Saturday Night Live?
Double, triple impactful, because this is working with your career and helping you make more money and advantaging you in many other ways.
No, the Explicit Measures podcast does not endorse money or help in any way will help you with your income.
This is not financial advice. Sorry, batteries not included.
Yeah.
Excellent. So jumping in today, our main topic for today, we'll be talking about or unpacking semantic models on the web. There are some features here, and this is what I was touting since episode number 1. We're going to move to the web. It's going to be based in the web. So here we are talking about it again, unpacking what happens when you model semantic models inside PowerBI.com. That will be our main topic. With that, we have a bunch of news and items from Beat from the Street. So, Tommy, you've got a Beat from the Street here. Give us some, what are you learning these days? You've got some information here, I think, around SQL databases you want to kind of just touch on again.
Yeah, so when the Fabric SQL database were introduced, I was absolutely stoked. I use databases all the time, both with clients and personally, and I wanted to test out not just obviously collecting the data, but really the transformative feature of SQL databases is that ability really to write back or add rows.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's something, it's just another place to store the data, but it can go in other systems.
It's a transaction database.
Yeah, and it's most universally known. We've talked about that and be able to connect. So I wanted to see if I could use it in a Power App in the same way that I'm using databases now. So I replicated one of my databases, and then I basically said, like, okay, how's the connection? Since there's no like Fabric connector in Power Apps or the Power Platform, but it's just a SQL database.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly enough, I didn't have to put in even the server name or the database name. I just said SQL database through Azure. It already knew, all the databases available.
Yep.
And the connection was fine. I could read, I could see everything. It worked with the app. But when I was going through to try to actually modify a row, because I have one that basically will collect a bunch of rows, either remove it or push it somewhere else.
Yes.
I was getting this network error. I'm like, oh, this is strange. And I'm like, oh, I had at first the word like, oh no, SQL databases are limited. And we didn't know that there's these other, limitations, and which would have been, I would have ranted about quite extensively. Otherwise, what's the point of having SQL databases and lake houses?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had to remember with SQL databases in something like Power Apps, in order for it to write back or modify a record, you need to have 2 types of columns in that database. You need a version row history and a sequence row, which you have to add through actually writing and there's no like UI to do that. There's just simply a SQL query to actually, in a sense, write those 2 rows. So I opened it up in Azure Data Studio. This database, I basically modified, added those to all the tables. Went back to Power Apps. Pretty seamless, man. Pretty crazy. Like I'm now able to write back and just all modifying a Fabric SQL database. Nothing was created in Azure. Nothing was created in any other system. Yeah, that is really, and it's pretty freaking awesome.
So I also saw, I think, another announcement here recently that they're retiring Azure Data Factory. That's going to get retired here pretty soon. Did you see that one, Tommy, across the internet?
I mean, I'm not surprised because
not Azure Data Factory. Azure, it's Data Studio.
Oh, the Data Studio.
Yeah, there's like SSMS and there's Data Studio. Yeah, it's going to be retired soon.
Are they just switching all their focus on SSMS then?
I don't know what they're doing. So on February 28th, 2026, they're going to be retiring Azure Data Studio, and they're going to actually they're removing it over to Visual Studio Code, which actually kind of
That makes a lot of sense. They already have the
makes a lot more
extension.
sense. Yeah, so it's not like it's going away; it's just going to be moving to someplace else. But I honestly think it makes a lot more sense for them to go only to VS Code because that's where all the plugins and app stuff is well. So data, sorry, yes, correct everyone. Thank you, Donald. It is Data Studio. It is not Azure Data Factory. It is around. I misspoke there. It is only Azure Data Studio, which is a separate application used to talk to things. And Tommy, when you were connecting to your SQL database in Fabric, you were using SSMS, right?
Yes, SSMS.
Okay.
So I will go back and forth with Data Studio. Now I can uninstall it, but yeah, either one works totally fine.
Okay. So I just want to point that out as well. So this is I think this is a big moment, right? Power BI and particularly Fabric has traditionally been all around the reporting read-only side of things, right? You had to use
collection of data.
Correct. Collect the data and then shape it and then report on it. So there's data engineering and the reporting side of it. Now we're seeing a whole bunch of other use cases really apply here that I think make a lot of sense, specifically around now we're able to use the operational database, build it right into Fabric, and now we don't need to involve the IT group again. This is going to potentially, so as an admin, I'm a little bit cautious here because this means potentially business units with access to Fabric can build their own databases where we can build our own islands of information, which again may not be wrong, but it also means you need a better data culture in your company to be able to handle these type of situations. I don't think you turn it off. I think you just limit the availability of it and you slowly roll it out with working with those teams to build those items.
Well, there are obviously the limitations. I think right now in a tenant, it's only allowed you can create 3 SQL databases. At least I got that prompt when I tried to create my 4th. It said you've reached the limit of number of databases you can create
in
Fabric.
How many can you create?
Apparently for just me 3, and it didn't say user, and because I was creating different workspaces. So
that's interesting. Is it all in the same Fabric SKU?
Yeah, it's all in the same license. So
is it on a trial or is it on a?
It's an F1 or F2.
F2. So. Okay, that's odd that they would limit you in the number of databases that you could put on an F2.
It's still preview. And again, also what hasn't come out yet is the billing for storing data. That was also the new thing too. Not only is it transformative, well, you're going to need that budget because unlike the other, like go crazy with the amount of lake houses you want to create, which is not necessarily going to increase your cost. Well, there's a separate billing that will happen for the storage of SQL databases in Fabric.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting. Be wary.
Yes, right. All right, let's jump into some more items here. So let's go from SQL databases. You had another item here for using deep research for Fabric learning. What do you mean by that, Tommy?
Yeah, man. So our favorite AI tools, particularly right now, OpenAI and Google have introduced 2 pretty neat features called deep. And again, they're both called deep research, no relation, but they do the same thing. What you can actually do is, let's say you wanted to learn about a particular topic, or you wanted to, like not just learn about it, but get all the information available on the web or whatever examples. And what I've done is when Fabric databases came out, I was like, all right, well, who's talking about it? What are some of the examples of how they're using it? And obviously you could do all your Google searches. I am a huge proponent of another tool called Perplexity, which is just a better search engine. We could talk about it another day, but I wanted to test it out on these tools. And it takes a long time when you actually use this deep research feature. Basically, you give it the prompt of, let's say you want to learn all the examples on the web or from people about examples of using Python notebooks in Fabric. That's what I want to see, not just news articles from Microsoft Learn, but what people have done, yada, yada, yada. Yes. And you basically write this is like, I want to see examples of people using Python notebooks. I want to see how they're applying it, whatever your context is. And it probably takes quite a few minutes. Google will say, hey, here's what I'm going to research. Is this cool with you? It kind of gives you what its research is going to be. Then you just sit back and you just kind of let it run. And I have to admit, I mean, it's so much better just than a normal Google search or even things like Perplexity, because it takes a while. You can Google actually give you a doc with all the links. You can
Mhm.
say, okay, let's learn more about that. So from a fast track, I'm just going to find a bunch of articles. It's pretty awesome. And with OpenAI, you can actually make a task out of that. So you know what? Go do that every Monday, and it'll do it for me. Kind of see all the latest news. So
This is good. I like what you're
yeah.
doing here, Tommy, because I I'm starting to learn how to better articulate things for AI. And
Mhm.
I was actually working on a problem recently. I was trying to do something in Python, and I was like, oh, I can't figure out how to do this thing. And I asked one of my developers, I said, hey, how would you do this? And they're like, have you asked AI yet? I was like, oh, dang it. I even forgot. Like my go-to still, again, I'm breaking my old habits to some degree. I need to find which copilots that I really like. And I'm overwhelmed by how many copilots are out there. There's like Cursor, there's GitHub Copilot, there's regular Copilot, there is, OpenAI, DeepSeek, all these different model programs that are out there all over the place now. And so I'm not quite sure where to go first. It would be nice to have like a collection of all those items together in one place where you could send one prompt and see which AI gives you the best results. I don't
Oh
know,
yeah.
something along those lines. But my first go-to is not necessarily to ask AI initially. So I'm still learning to do that. It's becoming my go-to item that I need to start using more frequently at the very beginning of my question, because I keep thinking in Google questions still. I'm
Right.
still asking Google questions. Hey Google, how do I do XYZ thing? How do I write this class inside Python, or how do I talk to
Mhm.
this API, or in an Azure Data Factory, how do I build this copy activity the correct way? Right? I get some help, but the
Yeah.
AI basically shortcuts that and does a much better job of getting me directly to the answer.
And what's really cool is if you're just using it like search, then it's
Mhm.
still fine, but just a little nuggets you can add to that prompt transforms the whole thing. So I'm using one right now. I found this online, and it's like you're going to be given various plans. And it's like, hey, before you actually give me your answer in all the notes, clarify the research methods, provide your evaluation criteria, and specify the expected outcomes that you're going to have, and you have to say you need to write that plan
Yeah.
for me first, which is,
Yes.
and it just changes in terms of why it's actually outputting that,
So
but also
the
what you're going to
reasoning,
get,
that's the
the
whole reason.
reasoning.
You're
Mhm.
actually adding the reasoning in front of the response and having it produce that. And then it's interesting because the computer doesn't know anything. It doesn't have like neurons in its head or anything like that, but it's thinking things through the way other most common humans would think through that same reasoning, and it
Mhm.
leverages that, and then using that, it helps itself give a better answer. Again, these are the techniques that I just don't know yet. I'm still just trying to learn them. In a year or two from now, I'll probably be using it a lot more. I'll be doing a better job asking the prompts in a way that gives me better reasoning. I will say this: one thing I don't love is if I go to Google, I can literally type the shortest phrase I need to get
Yeah.
the information I want. When I write prompts, the prompts are much longer now. I'm giving it a
Mhm.
lot more, like almost like a conversation a little bit at the beginning, and it feels more like I'm talking to like a coworker than I would be just Google searching, because you would
Mhm.
never talk to anyone and be like, function, Python
Yeah.
function class case. Like you would never talk to someone like that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be like example API call CS in what's the other one, PowerShell, right? you would
Right.
you wouldn't just say the words out loud and expect it to return an answer to you. This is a whole conversational piece, and there's a moment in time here that I'm starting to think this is different. Like this feels totally different now. And I don't love typing a lot of extra things. I kind of want the answer as quickly as I can, but as I have to be willing to make the trade-off between writing more text and getting a better answer with more text in it back, right?
Mhm.
So that's just a trade-off I think we have to make and start learning how to do it.
1000%.
Excellent. Really good items here. Love those two beat from the streets. I do have one news item here that I'd like to kind of point out here. There's an article that was just recently posted. There's the announcement of the activation of billing for workspace monitoring.
Mm.
I think this is going to be important, honestly. I think this is a feature that many customers that I've heard have been asking for. Imagine you have a Fabric SKU, it's on the larger end, and you have many different workspaces that are consuming various compute usages. this is going to allow you to, it's going to show you the billing for the workspace monitoring activities, right? So later on down the article, it talks about activation of billing for workspace monitoring, billing under the underlining components for event stream and event house and workspace monitoring will consume on March 10th. So there's some expenses coming with this. Event stream and event house are native items in Fabric, and it uses the Fabric units. So an event stream costs 0.22 compute units per hour. The event stream data traffic per gigabyte will cost you 0.324 CUs per hour. And the event house uptime costs 1 CU per hour per active core. So if you're hitting it very hard and you're running it a lot, you're going to consume more CUs. So these are not big numbers, right? I mean, even on an F2, you get like somewhere on the order of like 4 million CUs a month. So like this is going to slowly trickle away or eat away a little bit of your capacity. But I think the value of the data that you get out of this thing is going to be very useful to you. And so having a monitoring workspace activity is going to be very useful. It also comes with the monitoring usage metrics app. And then it'll give you other details around that as well. So just be aware that they're announcing this. I think this is really useful. You now have workspace level monitoring with real-time analytics, which streams data into an event house, which I think is brilliant. This is the only thing I can think of for most companies that would want to see any kind of real-time data, right? Yeah. Easy use case. People are hitting models. People are writing, analyzing Excel queries. We need that data somewhere landed in a lakehouse at some point. So this makes sense to me.
I wonder how that correlates with what we talked about on Tuesday with the template dashboards for workspace monitoring. So if you create your own, in a sense, dashboard right now, the Microsoft open source a few created by the community, that when that calls the monitoring, if that's additional cost as well. So there's the normal. So we talked about on Tuesday. This was another thing on the blog. The introduced template dashboards for workspace monitoring.
Those are template dashboards. Those are just consuming this feed of data. So the event hub is streaming the data through. Those template reports are bolted onto the Kusto database or the Lakehouse events, and it consumes those events and builds a report for you. So it's a pairing, right? Those reports pair with this feature to stream the data in.
So my question is, if you created, let's say, a really extensive workspace monitoring dashboard, since it's calling Kusto, whenever you open it, like let's say you made it whatever, you made it terrible, you made it heavy, would that do an additional cost too every time it calls?
No, you're absorbing well, it depends. If you're in the model and you're using the report that is directly accessing that data in Kusto, it's going to always cost something. I mean, you're not going to get the data for free. There's going to be some level of compute to get those things created. Now, if you change over to like an import mode, like so if you did like a semantic model importing from Kusto, then you're only paying for the load event of that Kusto, and then you're only paying for the compute units and the CUs required to run the report. So it's going to really depend what you want. I think, honestly, when I look at the stream of data that comes from the workspace, there's a lot of trash in there that you just don't care about. Like, hey, someone made a report. Don't care. Hey, someone, viewed a report, edited a page, added a visual. Like, these are things I just don't care about. What I care about is like the really big things. Like, hey, this MDX query came through and it came from Excel and it took 34 seconds to run. And by the way, it ate this much CU for that period of time. That's the stuff I care about, right? When I start seeing events that come up to the monitoring and I see 64 CUs used in like a single second, oh my goodness, now I need to start paying attention. Like that's what I need to look at. So it's that kind of stuff that I really care about. And those events that are going to be important to me, because now I have to figure out, why is my capacity overloading, and correlating that to what queries came in the interactive side that made the machine tip over a bit, right? So there's probably more, but there's really two lenses to what's going on here. You have backend processes, pipelines, notebooks, things that regularly load data. Those activities are much more consistent and even. They're very, it's not really, it doesn't go up and down very much. It's the user interactions that really cause hemorrhaging or issues or volatility, whatever you want to call it, within the tenant. Because during the work hours, people are going to do random things. They're going to go hit those models. And so the interactive side of things is really where you get a wide variety of variability. And that's what's hard to plan for. How do you plan for those huge spikes and those low lows. So
Yeah,
anyways,
really shifting through
things here.
all of the muck, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where, I mean, in my mind, true auto scale is really needed, right? I don't need an F.128 very often. I may need it for like 2 hours in the middle of the day. Great. Just give me it for the 2 hours that I need it and then bring it back down to like my normal F8 or whatever, like whatever the thing is, right? I want it to handle the spikes of stuff just automatically. Anyways, good stuff to talk about there. Anything else, Tommy, before we want to jump in?
I think that's good. That's good on my end.
Okay. I'll make sure I grab this link here quickly for everyone, just so everyone can see the billing for workspaces. I'll put that here in the chat, just in case you want to check it out. Here's the link for that topic as well. Whew, a lot of news and announcements today. A lot of things going on. January is, and moving into February is now quite a busy month. With that being said, Tommy, kick us off on our main topic here. Let's talk about edit data models in the PowerBI.com service. Now, you can edit models on Macs, Linux, whatever the heck you want. If it has I don't even know what other iPads, whatever you want. If you have a browser, you can edit semantic models. This is cool. Anyways, Tommy, go ahead. Kick us off on a bit more on the topic here.
I almost feel we should have waited till episode 400 to do this, just to really
Maybe.
put a nice little bow tie on this.
Who says we won't do it again? I don't know.
We're definitely going to talk about it again. If you recall, for those of our frequent followers, our very first episode, Mike made a bold prediction that we're going to edit and we're going to focus on editing models on the web, which was a ridiculous statement for 2021 or 2022. And here we are now with two ways in Microsoft Fabric to go in your browser and go ahead and modify one of your already existing semantic models that you maybe published, however you got it into a Microsoft Fabric in a workspace. I can enable a feature in that workspace to go ahead and modify that semantic model. Not Power Query. It's really just from the DAX relationships, measures. I can do all those things and I have that full editability. But there's also there's another side of the coin as well. There's also the ability and kind of the default way, if I'm creating a lake house and I want to create a default semantic model or create semantic models off of that, which is direct lake. Both of these have a very similar experience, but the main point here is we now have the ability, Mike, to circumvent Power BI desktop and be able to modify any existing models, both from the DAX measures, the relationships, the show and hide. And this is pretty incredible. And I think for our conversation today is now that these features are available / preview, at least the one for editing existing models. Well, let's talk about what does that mean, not just for an individual, but if I have a whole setup in a workspace with teams, am I using this? Should I use this? And when are the times to use it? So let's just kind of start with just really that ability here that is pretty extensive. And let's get your thoughts on what do you think of being able to edit semantic models on the web?
Yeah, I want to talk about a couple of things here. So, in the past, how are we able to edit models that lived in the service, right? So I want to kind of maybe go to a little bit of history around some of this as well. When we first got premium per user, that was kind of like the first entry into this point, right? So you're talking about the UI that lets you edit the model in the web, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, Tommy. The UI to edit the model on the web, that doesn't only exist in Fabric. That exists in Pro and Premium per user as well. It's available in all of them. That's what I don't remember off the top of my head. While you check that out, it looks like you're looking in your computer. So you go check it out and see if it works on Pro and a Pro workspace. But, if I wanted to edit any kind of model in the service, everything had to be edited in desktop. And so I see a trend here where Microsoft is giving us hooks deeper and deeper into the service that is allowing us to get experiences when we can edit the model, add a table, add a measure, put measures in folders. Like all of this feels really natural to me. And a lot of it is exposing those two windows, the modeling view and the DAX query view, directly in the service and in desktop. So it feels like the same experience in both places, which is great. Sorry, Tom, you're going to say something?
No, I was going to say, as you said, the history of this as well. Not only before Fabric, the one feature that was available to people with a premium or premium per user was the XML endpoint, which allowed us to modify. So let's give credit there as well. So really, for the past 5 years, if I wanted to modify a existing model that's been published, I didn't have to open up Power BI Desktop per se. I could have used tools like Tableau Editor 3, and I could modify that model to the heart's content, and all connected to the service through an XML endpoint.
And so that was my point. Is kind of where I was walking towards, was the XML endpoint was like the key to let us touch anything in the service. So everything
Right.
had to be edited in desktop unless you had premium somewhere. And then you'd get this URL, the XML endpoint, which then other third-party tools could read down the definition of the model, make changes, and push those changes up. However, you typically got locked into like, I could only edit in the service. It doesn't let you do anything. Like once you've modified the service, you're done.
So so the one limitation that a lot of people found out the hard way was if I were to modify a model on the web using the XML endpoint.
Yes.
Well, that ability, when something happens and I need to download that Power BI file with the model, locked, done.
Yep.
So you're stuck.
Yep. Now that's less of an issue.
Right. Much less of an issue now.
You can still modify some things and still download stuff. But also, now that you have the ability to edit these models, right, you can go get those models. And if you're using like the PBIR format or the PBIP format, now you can publish the file, like the collection of files that make up a report, directly to a Git, integrate that directly with PowerBI.com. And now you can edit in the service. You get your changes committed to the Git repo, and then you can download the repo locally to your desktop and then just open it up in Power BI Desktop.
Exactly.
This whole code, they've done a huge amount of like code refactoring to make it much more interoperable between the service and desktop. So that's where we were.
Yeah.
And now where are we now? Well, now we have all the same great desktop, let's call it modeling tools, right? The modeling view with the model tab or the model pane on the right-hand side now is there. We now have DAX query view. In desktop, we have Timdal editor. Great. I think actually Timdal editor fixes a lot of my major issues with being able to manipulate and talk to the model. However, we don't have Timdal view currently in the PowerBI.com service. So that's one thing I think is a little bit missing. But again, I'll give Timdal some grace here because Timdal view just showed up like in January. So I would expect some time before Timdal view would actually appear inside PowerBI.com, the service.
You made a really important note just now. I think that it can't be left unsaid.
Okay.
Before, even with the XML endpoint and when the feature came out to edit models on the web, but really both scenarios, there's a common issue if you were to do that really in the last few years. And I want to see if you can kind of identify that. If I edited something in the XML endpoint, it'll say prefabric. Well, what's the issue? What direct issue is that going to cause?
What direct issue is what going to cause?
If I were to modify something not in desktop, but on the web or using the XML endpoint.
Oh, I see what you're saying. And now I understand your question. It's when things get out of sync, right?
So
there's a syncing problem. Like if Tommy's in the web editing things and I go to the GitHub or I go locally and try and make changes to something, there's nothing that rectifies the changes between what I'm making locally on my machine and what Tommy's doing. So Tommy could physically be changing the model while I'm also changing the model at the same time. There's no co-authoring experience at this point. Right. This is why my guidance here would be is if you're ever thinking about allowing anyone to edit in the service, now this is a setting. So in order to edit the model in the service, you have to go to the workspace settings and adjust that property. There's a link I just put in the description here about how to edit models in web. So click on that link in the service here, and you'll see there's a setting underneath the workspace settings. And it's going to be called data model settings. You'll need to tick this on and enable users can edit the models with the Power BI service. This is also a setting in the admin portal. So if admins turn this off, it'll be disabled for everyone. This feature is in preview. So it's not fully released yet, but it is out in preview. So just be careful with that. But you lose this syncing item. Therefore, you need to use Git. Like if you're
that's exactly where I was going.
Yeah. So like if you're going to turn on this feature, if you're going to let people edit models in the service, that workspace better have Git integration turned on because it makes things much more error safe.
Oh, yeah. You have to.
Now Tommy can make edits. Now the web can make edits. And we can now have two different versions of code. And then you can then merge those pieces of code together to get a final result of the model.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. Really, before the Git integration, you were asking for trouble because the only way you're getting models in the web was you're publishing a desktop file, which was probably in SharePoint, and it was the desktop file. So anytime I'm in a modification, whether it's the XML endpoint or when this feature came out, well, my desktop's not up to date. The only way to get those updates in desktop would be to download the file.
Yes.
Unless, which we knew was you're not able to if you use this feature. So now you have a desktop that's out of sync, where you either have to go in desktop and then recreate it when you need to. Regardless, it didn't make a lot of sense. But no, I think right off the bat, Mike, just using this feature, you have a prerequisite is that has to be Git integration with it in some capacity.
So another comment here. This is a very nuanced feature of Git integration. But when Tommy and I are talking about Git integration, just to clarify for this for the audience, we're talking only about GitHub.com and AzureDevOps.com.
Right.
There's other places where you could put GitLabs or Git on your internal server inside your organization. So there's a lot harder. It's a lot harder for you. There is no integration directly with Git at the workspace level using your on-prem or local or other Git providers. The only two providers we're talking to here are GitHub and Azure DevOps. Both are controlled by Microsoft. And if I had to choose the two, GitHub I like, but there are some restrictions around what information you see of people editing things. So my preference right now is actually using Azure DevOps, because every time you commit something, you get a user made this change. You actually know exactly who made the user on every single thing. So I just want to clarify that when we're talking about Git, we're talking about Git in an online service that's not on a local machine, that does not require whitelisting or IP address configuration stuff. Like this is all pure GitHub and
Microsoft hosted,
Microsoft stuff. So just make that clear. Okay.
But but you would agree then that if you're going to do just a prerequisite, even before we continue, if you're going to do any modeling on the web, you have to have Git integration, or you're setting yourself up for failure. Hot take, or is that pretty right on point?
Say it again.
If you're going to be using modeling on the web in any capacity, requisite is it has to be. Or
I would always strongly, if you're not doing that, you're probably going to get yourself into problems at some point.
Yeah.
It will be an issue. So I'd recommend, in order to keep this thing as safe as possible, really, really recommend you use some sort of Git integration directly with the models if you're going to allow direct editing in the web.
Right. So here's what's interesting about this. This modeling on the web feature, even though we've talked about the Git integration, it feels so friendly. Like it's meant for someone to do quick edits, like almost a business user to go in, where I think there's a conflict here on that person's skill and kind of what their environment is and the feature and the ease of it. Because I think what you're dealing with here is, for heavy developers or heavy Power BI modelers, are you using modeling on the web? And I'm sure I've done some edits myself, but like, let's just start off, like, where does this actually fit in terms of the actual workflow? Because like I said, the context here for me is the feature is almost meant for like the friendly user just to go and make some quick edits, which is not the same person we're talking about.
Yeah, let me unpack your question here a little bit, how I interpret it a little bit, because I might interpret your question slightly different, Tommy, than how you're asking it, right? For this particular feature, right? So we're talking modeling on the web. I think this makes a ton of sense when you are going to be pulling data together in the lakehouse, and then from the lakehouse, you're going to go to a semantic model. Okay. So, like, for example, if I'm in Power BI Desktop, I can connect to like SharePoint. I connect to a website, an API call. Like I can do a number of things in desktop. I can pull those things together and use Power Query to build the tables and then directly link them into the semantic model. When I'm editing queries for web, there's no Power Query experience in the model editing experience, right? You have to do something with a data flow or some kind of data loading process to make the tables of the data. So for me, the breakpoint is, if you want to use Power Query, directly link to semantic models and build reports right off of that, that still feels like a desktop application, right? I'm going to connect to Snowflake. I'm going to get those tables in desktop. I'm going to muck with the semantic model. I'm going to do that in desktop. As soon as you start bringing all your tables to the service, right? That's where the lakehouse is, where this, I think, changes for me. Because Microsoft has made it so easy for me to go into the SQL Analytics endpoint, and instead of going into SQL Analytics endpoint and writing M code, I go there and just say, select the lakehouse I want, pick the schema I need, pick off the tables, done. So Microsoft is really shifting a lot here, I think. They're really focusing on bring all the data to the lake. Once you have that, modeling the web becomes much easier. Now, my workflow is almost 90%. Bring all data to a lakehouse, bring all data into Delta tables in the lakehouse. And because all my workload is focused on getting the data to the lake, it's very easy for me to go modeling on the web, no problem, boom, we're done. Bob's your uncle. But that's a Fabric way of thinking about this. This is not a very Power BI desktop way of thinking, or a
Right.
like let's talk just Power BI, not Fabric. You don't have that capability in just standard Power BI. You get data flows Gen 1, that's all you get.
Right, but and I think that big distinction there is you're talking about the secondary, or I guess really the primary workflow of modeling on the web is I'm choosing the tables from a lake house, and then I'm really starting from scratch in terms of the modeling. But I think we're starting with the feature here about I can edit a imported model. It could be all Power Query, nothing touches a lake house, and I can still edit that model on the web. To your point, Mike, yeah, absolutely. When it comes to lakehouse items, you kind of have to use the web, and that's actually a different feature than this, because the ability to edit imported semantic models, if I publish that from Power BI desktop, that doesn't, in a sense, touch or talk to a direct lake, is also available. So yeah, I agree with your workflow when you're talking about the lakehouse, but let me ask you about that. For the imported models, those P/X files that you might have had, where that experience is still easy to do. It's, the ease of use there, but who's that for?
This is more for a Fabric development team, right? That's what I'm talking about. Like, so if you are in, let's throw out Fabric. Let's just only focus on Power BI for a moment here. If you're only working on Power BI, I'm not saying modeling in the web is only used in Fabric. That's not what I'm trying to communicate here. What I'm trying to communicate is the experience of loading data tables. If you're not going to go through the data flows Gen 1 experience to get tables created and then consume them into semantic models, there's no, like in the semantic model for the web experience, there's no load data experience with that. You don't get to do that. Like, I can't go pick up a new table and just add it arbitrarily. So it assumes that you already have the tables somewhere and they exist, right, in the model. So in desktop, you have to go connect to the data flows Gen 2, create the tables or load the tables you want. Once those are loaded, publish to the service, and then you can make all your measures, you can make relationships, you can move your measures around. Like, those kind of edits are there, but there is no add new table from data flow Gen 1 in the web experience. Does that make sense what I'm trying to?
So you only get what you get in terms of the tables that you have.
Yeah, you can't. The modeling for web experience is only editing a model that exists with all the tables. The only experience that we get to add new tables or more tables through is through the lakehouse. Does that make sense?
No, yeah. It's only direct lake that I can actually edit, add tables. But for the imported model, this preview feature, you get what you get. There's no, hey, connect to the data flow or modify the query behind those tables. It's already the loaded tables that you have.
Now, let me just, okay, that's where we are today, right? Yes. That's what we get right now. I'm going to argue that if, again, I don't know, this is a big if TimdleView shows up inside the model for the web experience, that for me is the moment when I'm able to build my own tables and load net new tables to the semantic model. The reason I'm pointing this out is because you could have an existing data flow table. So let's imagine I've gone down to my desktop. I'm in purely a Power BI only experience. I'm in desktop. I've made my table. I've connected to the data flow Gen 2. I get the data in. Great. The M code is created. The table definition is created. That is all in my model. When I publish that to the service, TimdleView would expose the definition of those columns in the table and the M code. So if I wanted to duplicate that table, I could easily duplicate it.
And no,
Yeah,
you're
what?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I'll tell you what. So technically, you're right, but to me, this is conflicting because the Tyndall view is for the developer, and I'm making the
yeah,
argument
that's what
that,
we're talking about. We're talking about model developers. Like we're not.
but
You
that's
don't have to use the feature if you're not an expert in Tyndall. That's my. I don't care.
Tyndall, yes, but the semantic modeling on the web, how it exists today,
Yeah.
right? It's to me, they're building that for people who are not code heavy, right? Like
Well, maybe
because
that one view, but Dax Query View already lives there. You can already do Dax Query View in the web.
you can, but it brings you to your normal diagram view dashboard in a day on the web, basically.
No, not Dax Query View. Dax Query View is writing straight Dax just like you would in desktop.
It's available, but you are brought to when you go to open this model or edit this model, the
I thought
same
they're two
diagram.
separate buttons.
There's one for Dax Query View, and
Yes,
then there's the open the semantic model.
sure. But I'm
Yeah,
saying Tyndall View is the gap that we're missing here in the standard Power BI experience is when you have a semantic model open, there's no reason I can't add a new table to the semantic
I
model.
agree. I know.
But that's what I'm saying is the feature here that we're talking about is you need to edit the BIM to add the net new table and then go to the model view and then add the relationships and the measures you want. So that's my point here is that's where that's going to round out that complete story. I also argue that like we're not going to love the fact that you have a whole bunch of M code. You have to like write it by hand. I mean, Alex Powers will love it. He's going to be an expert at this. No issue there. But like once you have Tyndall view in the web for regular PowerBI.com experiences, then you can do everything you could do in desktop, in my opinion.
I see. I think you're jumping the gun with the Tyndall. Let's make the note. I'm not saying it's not effective or powerful or important, but for again the not heavy developer using an imported semantic model, that's the kind of lane I'm in
I don't
right
understand
there.
why you keep hanging on
Well,
these like
hold on,
basic users.
because it's a
Yes.
basic feature.
No, it's not. That's what I'm saying. This feature needs to be used for basic all the way to advanced users. If I'm going to model relationships, I'm going to do it as both a basic user and advanced user. If you're not an advanced user, don't go use Tyndall View. Like that's what I'm
I
saying.
agree. I'm not. I haven't said Tyndall. Here's what I'm saying. This feature already exists. The ability to add data in a UI through Power Query, and guess what? It's a data mart. That whole experience feels like it should be just semantic models.
Don't say the word data mart.
Hold on. Stay with me here. Stay with me here.
You've lost me with the word. Tommy, I was with
Stay
you.
with me.
Data mart. I'm out.
The user interface, the workflow of creating a data mart is basically what they can incorporate if I wanted to add data with a UI, with a user interface. Because guess what you do in a data mart to add the tables to it? There's, hey, get data. Oh, look, here's all my data flows. Or create a new data flow and it pushes the data to that data mart. So from a user interface point of view, Mike, if I wanted to add to a imported semantic model, and guess what? I am not, again, for a heavy developer, because if I'm going to use Tyndall, then almost why would I go to the web when I can use all the other tools out there? There's already a user interface that they can incorporate here rather than jumping all the way to the most developer centric interface with Tyndall. Because what you're saying, yes, the Tyndall can absolutely do it, but there's
no.
yeah.
There's a feature gap. What you're talking about. What you're talking about is like, okay, I'm also going to assume the UI that you're discussing here is Data Flows Gen 1, right? That is because that is Power Query for the web. You're going to be able to make data tables there. Data Flows Gen 1 will just create the tables you need, make and put them somewhere that you can go use them. So fine. Okay, Data Flows Gen 1 is the Power Query side of the experience. But in the model view, there is no ability. And what you're saying is the features missing is you should be able to go back to add table. There should be an add tables button. And that add tables button should be, okay, either add from a lakehouse if you're in Fabric, or if you're not, add from these data flow Gen 2s and just go read these tables and pull them in. So I think you're speaking more towards there is a missing feature in modeling for the web in the pure PowerBI.com experience where you can't add new tables. Is that what you're
exactly? I am only stuck with everything that's already imported. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So yeah. So and because again, to me, when I go into the edit models on the web, it feels the experience I am in. It feels like it's meant for, hey, You've done dashboard in a day and you didn't edit one of your models, business user. Come look at our nice user interface to quickly edit your DAX or hide some columns. That's what that experience feels like to me. It does not feel like the heavy modeler, because they're probably using the SMLA endpoint or something else. I think that's the argument, or I don't want to say argument because I don't know what I'm arguing, but the feature as it stands today, the semantic model on the web, it feels inviting for a business user, feels inviting for someone mid-tier. That's not the heavy, I would rather use Tyndall t-shirt person. Would you agree with that?
Mm,
If you go into that feature, it's
now
very
on
inviting.
the swag.powerbi.tips store is I'm a Tyndall only user.
I would
Tyndall's
rather be in Tyndall. Yeah,
I'd rather be in
exactly.
Tyndall. Oh man, yeah, I'm with, but I think
I know where
Tyndall.
you're at,
I
as where you are from your experience.
if you told me Tyndall was all written in JSON, right? If you look at the TMSL, TMSL, tabular model,
Mhm.
what is it?
Structured language? Or
Syntax language, structure language. I don't know whatever it is. TMSL. TMSL's all in JSON, and it's one big
yeah.
JSON file for the whole definition of the model. I would say no. I'm not going to go. I don't love writing a bunch of JSON over and over and over again. The Tyndall format breaks everything down into a YAML-like experience, much easier to read, much more human readable. I like it, and Microsoft has made like a really good conversion between like going from Tyndall to TMSL, so going from JSON to the Tyndall format and back and forth. This is a known quantity. It's very easy to go between the two experiences. So my opinion here, Tommy, is if it's just pure Tyndall, not hard to learn. I think almost every single medium to advanced user should be able to easily grasp what Tyndall's doing, and they're going to find the cleanness, how clean it is, right? Script this table and just say, here's all the columns, here's all the definitions, here's all the annotations. Like the fact that you can see everything in like a very clean format, that's not a huge gap. Now, I'm with you. There are people who are say like, I don't understand it. I won't. There's always going to be a basics level of people, and that will probably always be in a larger audience than these experts. Totally get it. But the gap to get between basic and a medium Tyndall user is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's becoming less of a barrier for me to get to that level.
And yeah, for you, Mike, I'm still doing a ton of dashboards in a day, and I'm still working with BI teams who are well into Power BI. But if I had to teach them everything already about data modeling and Power Query and DAX, and now I'm just gonna introduce on top of that also, by the way, here's another YAML view when they're still getting the hang of, and again, these are people who are not just like, I'm a marketing person, I do Power BI. These are people that are pretty centric. This is a very large audience still, and like I want to challenge you to think beyond your experience, your preference, and the knowledge that you have, because yeah, like obviously Tyndall, of course, logically from your engineering mind makes a ton of sense. Of course, Tyndall is the most effective, quickest, yada yada. But
Mm-hmm.
there's still a very large audience of people who maybe they're coming from data marts, or maybe they're still Power BI heavy, but you're still talking about a coding language when I would argue Power BI has not been that. And that has been why Power BI has been adopted so much. It's not like, yes, you do functions,
No,
but
it's been adopted because it's cheap. Let's be real. Like that, yes, but there's a lot of DAX. It's not the like. There's other tools out there that are probably easier to use than just pure Power BI. I'm let's be real here. The price to get Power BI Desktop is perfect, $0. Like that's the reason why organizations are getting and adopting Power BI, because there's this very low barrier to entry to get into the software, and within 5 minutes of using Power BI Desktop, you're like, this is impactful. I can start building real things I could use. That's why it's being adopted.
let me put it very clear to you. For 7 years, I wondered if I was a developer. And until Arun and at one of the conferences said for Power BI developers, they said, I guess I am one. When Tyndall came out, I know I am one.
Oh,
Right. So,
100%.
right. But and I again, so there's a large audience here who do Power BI, but that would not consider themselves developers, even if they work in Power BI frequently, multiple times in a week.
Mm-hmm.
And for that user, Mike, I am diverging with you. I'm not saying, oh, you know what, you should do Tyndall on the web. This feature of semantic modeling on the web, that feature feels inviting for that type of user. And to kind of jump back on that web experience, who's this for? Who is the semantic modeling on the web feature for?
It's for anyone. It's honestly for anyone. Anyone who wants to make a quick model change. Like, I can't tell you the number of times I've needed to add measures into a folder. I can't tell you the number of times I wanted to make an additional measure. Look, someone forgot to undo a column and make it a do not summarize column. I wonder, like, it's just simple organizing things. It's like the lightweight tasks that you're going to do in modeling. That's what it's for. It's for those things. But the fact that it's so closely linked to like all the technical features, that's what makes it very exciting for me, because I can do a lot of lightweight things there, and it's fast. They're going to continue to bring all of the desktop heavy modeling experiences to the web. This is the trend. It's going to get there. So the more that they're doing this, the more that they're continually pulling those things together, just the happier I become, because it makes you can do all the easy things, the simple things with a UI. And then when I need to go deep and technical with a lot of things, the tool still exists and I can still do all those very technical pieces there. So I think it's the right direction here. I absolutely love editing in the web. It is the way to go. It's going to be probably initially adopted by most of the basic users because it does a lot of the basic things. But I believe, for my vision of this is going to get continually more technical, and they're going to give you other experiences that will allow you to get into the weeds of heavy data modeling within the web.
See, this is I'm going to disagree on a point. We're going to split paths, because you know what? I don't like the experience on the web. It's fine. And to your point, the reasons I use it, yeah, quick edits, want to add things to a folder that I forgot to do, sure. But the experience to me, compared to other experiences in like Tableau Editor or desktop or Tyndall, well, it's subpar, because that autosave feature from even just the workflow of using a browser, of trying to get the things, are they actually getting saved, moving these around, hopefully nothing opens up on the browser. To me, from a developer point of view, I mean, yeah, quick edits, sure, but I'm staying away as much as I can unless I really need to use it.
I mean,
But
you're missing out on something that's easy. It's just easy.
yeah, but again, for that Power BI modeler who maybe is not a developer, this can probably be an essential feature, an essential part of their workflow.
It will be, and I see. I mean, as I've looked at this since we started the podcast, like what, 3.5 years ago now, almost 4. This has been a progression. Everything we're getting is becoming more web centric. Everything we're getting is becoming more fabric driven. You know, the price for using fabric is continually dropping lower and lower and lower. The threshold, the barrier to get into this stuff is becoming less friction every single day we go through this one. So Microsoft is definitely geared towards making this easier, simpler, more efficient. And now with the addition of like workloads inside Fabric, you're going to see other third-party tools starting to appear to make your experience easier. Imagine for me a world where Bravo is now part of Fabric. Imagine for me in a world where DAX Studio is a part of Fabric. Like, if you have those tools at your disposal directly, the timings, all the other things that you're doing, wow, like, I don't need anything from desktop. I don't need to install any software. It all comes to me within my browser, all directly inside a Fabric experience. I think that's what Microsoft wants. Microsoft wants more companies in the Fabric experience, because they know, and this is strategic, right? Wherever you put your data, if you land it in a place, the odds of you moving that data out and going somewhere else is way lower. This is not about the technology at this point. It's about how quickly can they get you to put data in the cloud in their environment. Because once you've moved it there, it's too expensive to go somewhere else. You're going to just stay there. Yeah. So if you looked at the amount of gigs each customer brings to the service, and then corresponding that to usage or spend or loyalty long term, the more gigs you have, the more loyal those customers become. And they know this. So that's the story here. They want to get your data down to the lake as soon as possibly as they can, as cheaply as they can. Keep it stored as cheap as you can, because they know the volumes of data you're going to build over time, you're not going to move later on. It just won't.
100%. And the workloads are great. But Mike, I don't have Fabric. I'm just Power BI Premium or Power BI Pro, which I can still do semantic modeling on the web.
Sure, you're starting
Right.
off. Like
So let me
your growth pattern will
calibrate for
start.
you.
Your
Yeah.
growth pattern will start there, and at some point you're going to run into a threshold where you're going to need to hit APIs or do something more advanced. And when you do, that's where Fabric shows up, and that extends the experience to everything else you need to be doing.
Yeah. Let me calibrate this for you. I'm going to ask you a scenario on your training. So you're introducing someone to Power BI. You're doing the dashboard in a day. On what day, if you had a 5-day training, on what day are you doing a heavy or session on modeling on the web? If you're going through the workflow of teaching everyone the workflow of just Power BI.
That's a good question. So we're just talking just Power BI. Day one, I'm doing
No.
day one, I'm showing you the service. Day one, I'm showing you the modeling experience. I'm showing you DAX query view on the service. And then I'm correlating that to what happens in desktop. Now, we're not building in it. I'm not dedicating an entire day to only building things in training for that service. But 100%, it's day one and it's part of the service. It's within the first hour and a half of the training session. I'm going to point these things out. We're going to go through the service. I'm going to point out all the things you can do there. I'm going to show you what a semantic model is. And I'm going to show you the modeling experience and DAX query view. Because when I go to desktop and actually teach data modeling, the rest of day one and part of day two, right? That's when I'm going to show you, oh, and by the way, remember how I showed you the modeling experience and the DAX query view experience are both in the web and on desktop. So we will build and only work in desktop for training, but I will 100% point out that the feature exists inside the service as well. So that's how I handle training.
So that's showcasing, but would you devote any training to it? Yeah, like I can do demo too, but
if the desktop does everything that the web can do and more, I'm going to train you in desktop. That's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
But until the web does everything that desktop can do, I can't legitimately full on train you in the service and say, oh, and by the way, we also have Power BI desktop. Everything in the service is happening in desktop. Like that would get too confusing for people. But I think we're getting very close to the day where everything can be done. Like I could envision in the next 6 months to a year, there will be training changes I'm going to make that will be, let's build a data flow Gen 2 in the service. Let's connect to those datas in the model view. Let's build our relationship. Let's build our measures and let's visualize. This will be an entirely web-based training experience, how to do everything in the web. It's going to be like, I'm going to mark my words. What day is today? February 13th. In 6 months to a year from now, I'm going to give myself a little bit of time range here. So by next year, February 2026, I think you're going to have enough where you could do an entire training class only in the web and describe it Power BI all the way through.
So that's about 48 episodes from now, let's say. All right. So we'll say around episode 640. You think this is going to be available?
450.
Or 450? 450.
Maybe.
Okay.
450 between episode 450 and 500 is where we're going to see this up here. Is that weird that we're timing ourselves by how many episodes? That's weird.
I think that's a more appropriate way to do things now, kind of thing. That's how we're going to predict the future. So
I love it. All right. Well, that being said, we've got to run. We got other things we got to go do. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Chat, you've been amazing. A lot of great discussion. We really appreciate you in the chat, jumping in, talking about things. Really thank you guys for engaging in the chat. It's super fun and very engaging there. Thank you so much for doing that. With that being said, we appreciate your time. Have a great day. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. And share with a friend since we do this for free. Do you have a question, idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to PowerBI.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of PowerBI.tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.